And if the disaster is so severe that the state can't adequately respond or recover, then we would call in FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So that's kind of how we're structured. All right, so you guys can probably see, oh wait, there. Okay, so this very first, I only have some photos, but I can speak a lot to them. But this here is our State Emergency Operations Center. It is a magnificent facility. It's one of the best in the country. We are located beside the Beetler Armory, the National Guard Armory, on 161 between 315 and Sawmill Road. So this is the basement of our facility, and when we activate for disaster, then we will bring in all of our state partners, state agencies, ODOT, Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Health, all of those agencies to come in and help us with the response to the disaster. So this photo here, if you can see the big screens on the left-hand side, this was the very beginning of our activation for COVID. So not only do we activate for natural disasters, but we also activate for human caused or health. So we evacuated when we had the Ebola scare in 2014. We we activated for the Republican National Convention. We activated when Toledo's water got inundated by the algal bloom, and I think that was also in 2014, because Toledo and a lot of the area around Toledo didn't have water. So we activated for that. So we activate for a number of things. And then over on the right-hand side of the screen is our mission. So we have preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation are our main missions. So preparedness is, and I'll have something at the end to show you where you can go to have a personal preparedness kit ready, so that if you are impacted by a disaster, you have the things that you need to sustain yourself for, they used to say 3 days, I think now it's up more to 7 days. So we have a branch that helps train and exercise for responding to a disaster. Then we have our response aspect, which is what we do when we go into the state EOC to respond to a specific incident. And then my branch, disaster recovery really starts with when a disaster starts, right? So especially like for the tornadoes that they have in Kentucky right now, or that they had overnight in Kentucky, their response is going to be focused on finding everyone that they can, getting power restored, things like that. And then they're very quickly going to move into recovery. What can we do to help these disaster survivors rebuild their homes? What can we do to help the local governments who are going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on overtime for their emergency responders, all the debris that's going to need to be removed, all of those things. So that recovery piece starts almost immediately, especially when you have something like a tornado. And then our mitigation section focuses on what can we do to mitigate so that disasters in the future don't have as significant of an impact on the state. One thing that we do a lot of that's very, very popular in our mitigation branch is they have an annual, I can't think of what it's called. Annually they say, hey, we're gonna open, it's a safe, there we go. It's a safe room rebate program where they open up to the entire state. People can say, yes, I'm interested in having a safe room built in my home or on my property. And then if they're chosen, then they'll get some of the grant assistance from Ohio EMA to help fund those safe rooms. So a safe room can be outside, it can be underground, it can be built into your home. So there's a lot of ways that you can have a safe room within on your property to keep you safe if a tornado would happen to go through your neighborhood. So so that's my first slide. Okay, I'm going to figure out how to go here to my next one here. All right. So I apologize for my cropping. I didn't do a very good job. So I know that all the damage that was caused by the Krakatoa explosion wasn't due to a volcano or wasn't due to a volcano. However, or a tsunami proper, tsunamis are generated by an earthquake or something underwater that causes the water to scientifically do whatever it does. However, we did have a very significant incident in Ohio in 1990 where we had a lot of rainfall, and Shadyside, Ohio is over on the eastern side of the state. It's in Belmont County. 26 people were killed during that flood. This is the flood that I started on. That was my first one when I worked for FEMA. And as you can see, there was a gigantic wall of water that all this debris had gotten blocked up behind bridges, different things. And when that wall broke loose, it carried all of this debris out into the Ohio River. People's homes, farm, animals. This is where they found most of the fatalities was within the Ohio River. So this was a very devastating flood, especially locally to this community. And they have a memorial there. It's obviously been many, many years since this terrible flood happened. And I still work with people who live out there, who were there when it happened. I still work with them on a regular basis. So, but I thought it kind of apropos considering, all the damage that was done by Krakatoa was very similar, although very much larger in scope. Okay, and then of course we had lots of other smaller floods between 1990 and 1997, but one of the next significant floods that we had in Ohio, we call fondly the Ohio River flood. So it impacted not only Ohio, it also impacted Indiana and Kentucky. But we had nearly $180 million in damage. 6,500 residences were impacted and businesses. There were a lot of evacuations. We activated our EOC and received a federal disaster declaration within days, which normally it doesn't happen that quickly. As you can see, this is all in the Cincinnati area. So the photo on your left is Moscow, Ohio, which is in Claremont County. And the photo on your right bottom is in New Richmond, which is in Claremont County as well. So it goes Hamilton, Claremont, Brown and Adams, or Adams and Brown, now I can't remember. But those are the counties along the Ohio River that were really, really impacted by this disaster. And this disaster, there was a lot of mitigation work done following this disaster, meaning that a lot of the homes that you would have seen impacted by this flood were acquired and the property was demolished. And those people moved then out of harm's way. That's very important because we had another significant flood in 2018 in the same area, and we didn't have nearly as much damage as we did in 1997 because of all of that mitigation work that was done following this flood. I would also note, and I forgot to mention it, but the Shadyside flood also had significant changes to how we are informed of flooding, potential flooding that's happening. We installed rain gauges all across the state to help us in the National Weather Service evaluate what's going on real time in certain parts of the state so that we can more quickly respond to or give warning of flooding that is happening or will be happening very soon. So you'll see that a lot of the things that happen with these floods have positive repercussions moving forward for how we do our work in emergency management. And all the dollar amounts here, we talked about getting disaster declarations. we've had numerous in my tenure, 20 to 25, 20 natural disasters declared by the federal government since I started. I don't know if I did that or somebody else did that. So, all right, our next big event was in 2004 and 2005. And if you lived in Central Ohio at Christmas time in 2004, you will remember this one. We had a significant snow right before Christmas, and then we got a whole bunch of ice, and then we got a whole bunch more snow. So I remember it. I had newly moved into my home. I didn't lose power, luckily, but there were a lot of people in Central Ohio who lost power during this event, and knowing that it was bitterly, bitterly cold. Another thing that you may not know that happened with this one was that there was flooding across an enormous part of this state. So in all, we had 62 counties under a presidential disaster declaration from this incident. It was our longest incident period prior to COVID. It ran from December 22nd until early February of 2005. An incident period for me means that that's when the damage was caused. So that's a really, really long incident period. You usually only see maybe a week or two, or with a tornado, a day or two. So we had a very long incident period. This was one of our most costliest disasters in the state. And so, you're just imagine, you're in a home and it's bitterly cold and you've got flood water all around you, or you have to try to evacuate the ordeals that you must have going through those types of situations. And I kind of skipped back and forth with my slides here, but so this was a winter storm in 2003, which also impacted Central Ohio. We did have record snowfalls that year as well. It was over Valentine's Day weekend of 2003, but they also had a significant ice storm down in Southern Ohio, most particularly in Scioto, Lawrence, and Gallia counties, which are on the eastern side of the Ohio River. Not eastern, southeastern, southern part of the state, eastern side. So significant ice storm. So folks are having to walk back and forth to get to their groceries, you can see all of the debris that was down. It took a very, very long time to get the roads reopened because of the ice and because of the debris that had gone down onto the roads. This one is notable personally to me because this is when I met my now husband. So my husband also works at Ohio EMA. He started out in the recovery branch as a temporary employee and has moved around the agency and is now in upper management. So kind of a unique situation for me being in emergency management to also have my husband be in emergency management. But he's on the response side and I'm on the recovery side. So we always joke around that the response side is the sexy side of EMA, but I would beg to argue that recovery is just not necessarily sexy, but the response is where you run out and you save the day. And then you have the recovery side where we just try to make people whole as we can. But that was a significant event for me personally. So these next two, again, if you're in Central Ohio, you would recall these. This was, we finally call it Dry Ike. This was the remnants of Hurricane Ike that had hit Texas. And it came up, went through up through Texas, up through Ohio into Pennsylvania. It was September 14th of 2008. It was a Sunday. There was no rain. It was beautiful, blue skies, but it was very, 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 very windy. Luckily, I didn't lose power here that year either, but my mom did. And so we went and picked her up and brought her home. But as you can see, winds in excess of 65 miles per hour. So we think it's windy today, but That was a very, very windy event, short-term time frame, and that it entered and left the state within a day. But again, caused significant damage, wind damage, debris, woody debris, things like that. And then this is another one that you might recall. This was the derecho. This was on June 29th of 2012. And as you can see on the smaller map, or on the side that's got the map, it entered the state at 3 p.m. and exited the state by 7 p.m. So it went through the entire state in a matter of 4 hours. Lots and lots of power outages across the state, lots of debris removal across the state. It traveled on. So they had a derecho in Iowa. They had a derecho somewhere recently west of us, but not a super common type of weather event, but it does a significant amount of damage. These were the Memorial Day tornadoes of 2019 that impacted the Miami Valley region, the Dayton area. This was an EF4 tornado is the second worst. Worst is EF5 is the worst tornado, the most powerful tornado that you can have. Excuse me, that you can have. But it impacted several areas in Montgomery County, which is where Dayton is, in Greene County, which is where Beaver Creek is. But all in all, there were 21 tornadoes that went through the state overnight, the night before Memorial Day. They went, I think, so they started in Mercer County, which is all the way over on the western side of the state, went through Montgomery County, Greene County, and there were tornadoes also reported in Pickaway County and in Perry and Muskingum. So that storm system, not unlike what they saw in Kentucky overnight, in Indiana and Arkansas, a very extended storm system that carried with it a lot of tornadoes. This one was very challenging for me as in my profession, because we hadn't had a disaster where disaster survivors, where we had people impacted who couldn't recover without assistance from the federal government. So, you know, as you can see, a lot of times when you have a wind event, even if it's a tornado, people are insured. However, this tornado went through areas that had very low incomes. They didn't have insurance on their homes. So we got a federal disaster declaration, which brought in a whole lot of different programs, crisis counseling, so to help people with their mental health, disaster unemployment, disaster case management. So trying to put a system in place that if you have a disaster in your community, that you can provide case management to those individuals so that they can go to one place and say, this is what I need. I need a refrigerator. I need to find a job. I need to find a car. I need to find a place to rent, things like that. So this brought with it a lot of new challenges for me, because I was in a position in the branch where I had to oversee this specific program differently from the program that I would normally administer, which is to help local governments with their recovery. So, but that's the path that the tornado took in the Miami Valley area. It doesn't include the tornado path as it exited the Miami Valley area, but a very significant tornado outbreak for Ohio back in May of 2019. So this is what I'm kind of used to dealing with, are flood events and landslides. So over in eastern and southern Ohio, eastern, southeastern Ohio, all the way over to Cincinnati, really, because of the geology, they're very prone to landslides. And the landslides can impact roads, like you can see here, which almost looks like an earthquake, but it's not. It's a landslide. This is down in Ross County. But these landslides can also impact people's homes. So if they are living on a slope and that slope is deteriorating, it can cause people's homes to be destroyed. So a lot of that kind of damage happens mostly in the Cincinnati area, but it can happen anywhere in the state. And then the photo on the right-hand side is a large boulder that fell down onto State Route 7 in Lawrence County, which is again on the Ohio River. I should have found, I had a better picture where there was, because it fell during the night and this car was driving on State Route 7 and just happened to see it in its headlights and stopped right in time before it crashed into it. But it took a lot of time for that ginormous boulder to get cleaned up and removed and the road repaired. Okay, so now we go to COVID. Probably everybody's tired of hearing about COVID. I know I am, but I wanted to bring up a couple of things regarding what we've done as Ohio EMA in response to COVID-19. So we activated our EOC, so that big giant room, we activated that EOC on March 9th of 2020. We did not deactivate the EOC or let everybody not do what they would traditionally do during an activation, not until July 2nd of this year. So we were activated for almost a year and a half. That photo there is of our EOC, the one on the left-hand side. And I selected this one again because that's my husband in there doing his job, helping to get things to people that they need. But when COVID-19 first happened, a lot of the work that we were doing within our agency was trying to find PPE to get to whoever needed it, whether it was hospitals or schools, of course, before we all shut down our schools. But that's a lot of what we did at the very beginning. And PPE was very difficult to find because this was a global pandemic. And that was also something interesting. There was a part in Krakatoa about how the global impacts of that event and how it impacted, how people had to start looking at things globally rather than just what's going on in their own community or their own town. COVID-19 is a perfect example of that because it was a global pandemic and everyone was trying to get the same stuff, whether it was PPE or vaccines or what have you. So a very large scale event that had global implications like Krakatoa. So that was the beginning of what we did, but then we also started working with food banks. We also started working with the homeless shelter boards. I mean, we grew into, we started working with organizations that traditionally we've never worked with before. We were helping set up alternate care sites. So if the hospitals couldn't keep, they were full like they are now, unfortunately, they set up alternate care sites so that they could push either COVID patients or non-COVID patients to these other facilities so that they could be taken care of safely. You might recall in the news when New York City had one of those big barges come into their dock early on in the pandemic. That was an alternate care facility to care for people if the hospitals got too full. So many things that we were involved in. Of course, I came home, I started teleworking then, which was also a challenge because I'm a mom of 2 little girls. So trying to teach and do disaster recovery and try to keep my husband healthy and mentally and physically because he was working 13-hour days, 7 days a week. One nice thing that they did at the EOC is they brought in these dogs to help with the mental health for the people who were working in the Emergency Operations Center, to help them so that they could stay mentally healthy while they were working these long hours and doing all this work to help to make sure that we could lessen the pandemic in Ohio to the best of our ability. I wanted to also note here that the Federal Emergency Management Agency right now has grants available for families who have lost loved ones due to COVID-19. So I'll make sure that Jessica gets this. And if you know of anyone who has lost someone to COVID-19, that you could link them up to this website so that perhaps they could get all or most of their funeral expenses covered through this grant program. So that's a good grant program it's available across the country, but there for folks who need it if unfortunately they've had a loss due to COVID. Oh, I can see the chat now over there. Maybe that's why I couldn't see it before. All right, and then this is the website for your own preparedness, for self-preparedness, ohio.gov. If you go to ohio.gov and then go Ready Ohio, there's all kinds of things here that will help you build a kit, make a plan. It should be good no matter what type of event you have. So it's not only important to make a plan for natural disasters, but it's also important to make a plan if there's a lockdown at your kid's school and how you're going to reconnect with them, things like that. So a very, very useful website for your own personal preparedness. So that's kind of all I have, Jessica. So I don't know if there's any questions. I'm happy to, sorry that was so short, but I'm happy to take any questions or just to have an open dialogue about what we do at our agency or any other experiences that I've had.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. I do have a question. What did you think of the book?
I loved it. I liked it very much. The beginning part of it was kind of dull, to be honest. The colonial part of it, I don't know if you're allowed to say that in a book club, but I just did. Personally, my favorite genre of movies is disaster movies. Independence Day being my favorite, which I guess you could argue whether that's a disaster movie or not. But all of those impacts from natural disasters are really, I mean, they're cool. They're not cool for the people that they're happening to, of course, but when you're looking at movies, it's all make believe anyways. But so I think that was my favorite part. When they finally got to, his or her 4 eruptions or explosions. Interesting, the part about the fact that you could hear it, that it went around, the sound went around the world 7 times. I found all of that very, very fascinating.
Personally, I find that I like that somebody who has your job is actually interested in the subject. That gives me gives me joy and hope. So good.
Yeah.
Had you ever read a disaster book before?
No, not that I can recall. No.
Because I can tell you that is an entire genre. Like that is a historical genre. If something big went down or a lot of expensive things got destroyed, somebody wrote a book about it, I promise.
Okay.
So,
yeah. We'll have to look into that for sure.
Yeah, and Simon Winchester, and for everybody, if you liked the book and how it was read, that's called narrative nonfiction, where honestly it was like reading a novel, where it's not dry, where you're getting into people's heads and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, if you do a search for narrative nonfiction, you'll get tons of stuff that's like this, that brings history alive. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I do see some people have put some questions in, myself included. So I wanted to know, are your facilities in the basement, are they there for safety or because that's just where it landed?
Yeah. So when this agency started, it was the Civil Defense Agency. So this actually harkens back all the way to the Cold War, and So it's been around for a really, really long time. And then sometime in like the 80s, I think it became the Disaster Services Agency. And we were actually under the Ohio National Guard at that time. So when I first started at Ohio EMA, my office was at the Beetler Armory next door to where we are now. And then we needed more space. So after that 1990, well, it would have been a flood sometime before 1997. The governor was in and into our EOC, which was much smaller over at the Armory, and said that we needed a bigger space. So there was land right beside the Beetler Armory, and we purchased it. And if you ever see it from the outside, the base, so it was essentially built so that the basement could withstand anything. A nuclear blast, although I have my doubts about that, but tornadoes, what have you, that if there was some kind of incident that happened in Franklin County, our building could hopefully stay intact so that we could still go in there and do our job. So the basement is, if you ever go look at it, there's like a slope up to the level where you come in, and the Emergency Operations Center is down there. And as you can see from that first picture, it's very, very, very tall. So this picture was probably taken from our director's office. And then the offices, where I work and all that, are up on the level of the building where you would see where you could see from the outside.
Thank you. So what is the scariest or worst disaster situation that you have ever personally experienced?
Well, I'd say that the derecho probably was the scariest, because I had a 1-year-old and I had just gotten home from work. So I was all by myself. Not that I'm not resilient. But I think that one, and driving around when we had that winter storm, that ice storm around Christmas time in 2004, was also kind of scary for me. But I think the worst one, honestly, has been COVID, because I'm trying to take care of kids, trying to take care of my family. I'm trying to do my job. I don't want to get COVID. So I think mentally, COVID has probably been the most personally challenging for me.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
So what about on the job? So do you work from that office, or do you have to go on site?
Both. So we work primarily out of that office, but if we have a disaster, or when we have a disaster, we have to go out and do damage assessment. So damage assessment is where we go out and we evaluate the damage that the disaster caused, whether it's to homes and businesses or local government facilities. So I've been to all but 5 counties in the state, whether I was training or responding, recovering from a disaster. FEMA also sets up field offices when we get a disaster declaration, so that the state and FEMA can work concurrently together in the same facility. And sometimes those are located away from Columbus. So there was a very significant flooding event up in Northwest Ohio, in Findlay and Ottawa in 2007. And so I had to go up and co-locate up there for a while. But most of what we do is a day out here and there to go out and meet with local officials, or to do site inspections, things like that.
Have you ever gotten caught up in essentially like the rubble or the situation that was there?
No, no. There was a tornado up in Wood County in 2010, and I was there the day after. So not during it, but the day after, and that was probably the quickest I'd ever been to a disaster after it happened. And it was very devastating to see the people's homes had been destroyed. They were supposed to have their high school graduation on the day that I was there, which was the day after the tornado hit. The valedictorian's father was killed. I think 5 or 6 other people were killed. So that was very heartbreaking for me. I've also been up in a helicopter twice to do damage assessment, which was kind of cool, to go up with the highway patrol and assess the damages down on the ground. The first time was in 2004, and then the second time was they had some tornadoes up in Defiance County a few years ago, and my director and I went up. So that would have been immediate aftermath, but not in the thick of it. So,
have you ever kind of lost it because of what you've seen? Like just had to excuse yourself and have a moment?
Yeah. So the Memorial Day tornadoes, I had some moments like that. It's also, even though I work mostly with local governments, you still have times where the stress for those local governments is so high that they break down when they're on the phone with you. So that can also make it very challenging. You know, a fiscal officer who's got millions of dollars in damages and their budget's $200,000. It gets very stressful for them as well. And you know, you feel that with them when they call, because they're frustrated and I really just want to help them as best that I can. But I think those Memorial Day tornadoes were very challenging, coupled with the fact that they had the shooting in the Oregon district in August of that same year. Very traumatic experiences for the Dayton area in 2019.
Wow. So for your job, for however long it's been around, is there an event that kind of goes down in history that everybody still talks about, that they talk to about, and, you know, they tell newbies the story?
Oh, wow. Man, I don't know. I mean, we've had so many significant ones. I mean, I think probably more than one specific event would be the fact that from 2003 until 2005, we had 8 presidential disaster declarations. So we had at least 8 disasters in Ohio that reached the severity that we needed the federal government to come in and assist us. So I think we talk more to that experience of it. Just, you know, you think you're done with this one and then you've got another one, and then you think you're done and you got another one. So I think we probably talk more to that piece of it than we do any specific event. But I would imagine that COVID-19 will probably become one of those. Well, I guess now that I think about it, sorry for my stream of thought there. I guess 9/11. So we had some flooding in the Hamilton County in the Cincinnati area in, I think, August of 2001. And a lot of the folks from our office had just gone down to the field office down there in Cincinnati. And the night before 9/11. And it was all a bunch of girls, and we had all gone out to a bar, and we were drinking and having fun and laughing and just having a really, really, really good time. And then we woke up the next morning and went into the field office, and we were having our daily brief with FEMA. And I heard my boss behind me say that something had happened. So this was, you know, before the internet, really, but when internet was just starting. I think I had a cell phone, but it would have been a very rudimentary one. But it happened, and they decided they were going to close the field office. So my colleague and I got in the car and drove home to Columbus, which was very, very eerie. So I think if you look at it as one specific thing, that was something that we looked to for 2 reasons, because we had bonded so much the night before. And then we had this tragedy the next day, but our EOC activated. Our director, Mr. Shipley, was somewhere in one of the Western states and had to get home. He actually traveled to New York City shortly after the terror attack and saw what was going on there. So I think that's probably one that hits home, but also one that we would talk about.
Right, thank you. So actually, speaking of New York and other things, do other states, is anything ever so bad that other states have to come in and help?
So that's called the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, where can help states following a disaster. And the only time that we've used EMAC was we brought in some law enforcement to prepare for the Republican National Convention that was up in Cleveland in 2017. However, we have gone to other states to assist them. We've gone to Hawaii, we've gone to, and not just EMA, but assets from the state. So urban search and rescue teams. I've been to South Carolina and Florida to assist with recovery operations. The National Guard has gone to all of the hurricane states to help with their response activities. So it's a very valuable compact that the states and territories have to give that assistance when they don't have a disaster happening and another state needs their help.
Do you know if that's ever happened with a volcano? Honestly, I only think of Alaska and Mount St. Helens with United States.
So when was Mount St. Helens?
What year? 82?
Right,
early 80s.
So it wouldn't have been structured like it is now because EMAC didn't come into play until 2000 something or the late 90s maybe. But I'm sure folks would have gone to help. But yeah, volcanoes aren't really a thing for the continental US, I guess.
All right. And then you had talked about going to Ohio Wesleyan, but did you go there specifically to get this job?
I did not.
And what's your job title again?
Yeah, I'm the disaster recovery branch chief. So I went to Ohio Wesleyan for a year and a half, and then I transferred to Ohio State. And I had already started working, or I started working for EMA when I went to Ohio State. So I was a temporary, I was like what they called an intermittent. So I could work 1,000 hours a year. And I actually did that until I wasn't full-time at Ohio EMA until 2000. So I had already graduated. I had a degree in anthropology. I didn't think emergency management was going to be my profession, but I had some personal circumstances happen and stuck it out and realized that I love it and I love my job. It's not fun all the time. It's very frustrating. But there are degrees in emergency management that you can get. My husband was the first employee at Ohio EMA who had a degree in emergency management. He got it from the University of Akron, which was one of the first universities to offer an emergency management degree. You can get them lots of places now. So it's a thing now, but it wasn't my intent to be here as long as I've been here.
Wow. All right, let's go back to the chat. You talked about activation, but what happens? Like if somebody, hits the button, then what is activation?
Yeah, sure. So we'll go to the Memorial Day tornadoes because that's the most recent in my mind. So the Memorial Day tornadoes started entering the state between 8 and 10 the night before. And we have regional staff. So we have people who work for Ohio EMA who live in 5 different regions of the state. So we have a central, northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest. And if something happens in a county will call our Ohio EMA Watch Office. Our Watch Office is a 24/7 office that is constantly monitoring what's going on in the state. And they will call the Watch Office and say, we've had something happen. This is what it is. We'll get back with you. I'm kind of making this up, but you get the gist. And then their regional teams will come to their county to help them with their response. So the tornadoes happened. My husband got the call. He went to work, and we activated sometime during the night. And what the activation means is that our director says, okay, these agencies need to come into the state EOC to help us with this response. We're structured in what's called emergency support functions, and we have 14 of them. So ODOT might be in charge of one of them. If we have a drinking water problem, EPA would have to come in. If we had a health issue, health would come in. So they all come into the EOC, and they sit in these spaces on the screen. They all have a designated space where they'll sit, and we coordinate the response to the disaster. So we have partial activation, which means that some of the emergency support functions would be called into the EOC, or we have full activation, which means everybody gets called in. The governor also declared sometime during the night, I think, or early morning, and a governor's declaration then allows state agencies to go do work off of their systems. So it would allow ODOT to pick up debris on a county road or a city road versus only being able to pick up debris on a state route. So that's what activation means. In this picture over here, underneath the American flag is our executive office, or not our executive office, oh my gosh, it's been so long since executive room, sorry. It's been so long since I've been in there. The executive room is where our director, the governor, cabinet level people would come in and make the decisions that they need to make, and then tell the people on the floor, this is what we're going to do. Underneath the Ohio flag, and it's kind of hard to see, but on the right-hand side of the page, that's our watch office. So they're situated right within the Emergency Operations Center. And then over underneath all of the screens is our public information office, so that we can, message to the public, work on press releases, all of that kind of stuff. So everything that's going on, if there's something that's going on in the state of Ohio, at least at the state level, the heart of it is going on in that room. And then your county EMAs also have an emergency operations center. Now, some are more robust than others. Obviously, you get in rural Ohio and you probably have one person working at EMA, and their EOC is probably just a little small room. But that's the structure. So they would activate as well, just like we would.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Do all Ohio disasters get named?
No Ohio disasters. I mean, if it gets a name, it's been named by the Weather Service. Oh. If we get a federal disaster declaration, it will get a number associated with it that FEMA assigns. So the first disaster that I worked was 870, and COVID is 4507. They skipped the 3000s for whatever, and that's across the country. So that doesn't mean we've had that many disasters in Ohio, but they get a number. They don't get a name.
Okay.
It's finally called Dry Ike, because that's what it was.
Somebody asks, most insurance companies do not cover floods unless you have flood insurance. How are residents helped through this if it's this widespread?
That's a very good question. So just truth be known, you can get insurance even if you're not in a floodplain. I'm not anywhere near a creek, but if I wanted to get flood insurance, I could. So that's always your best bet. Unfortunately, if you're not insured, there's not a whole lot that can be done. It's extremely difficult for Ohio to get a presidential disaster declaration because we're such a large state. Like Kentucky is probably going to get a disaster declaration from those tornadoes that they had. Not to say that we wouldn't, but a lot of our disasters were more small in scale. And so we don't get to the level of FEMA. So if we can't get a federal disaster declaration, then we can get loans from the Small Business Administration, or we can, we have a state program that's limited in scope. But even if you get a federal disaster declaration, the maximum amount of funding that you can get for your home is $33,000. The maximum you can get for your personal property is $33,000. So there's not, and if we have a, you know, if your basement gets flooded, that's not going to get us a federal disaster declaration. Voluntary organizations can come in sometimes and help with cleaning up or, you know, small repairs. But it's extremely difficult to recover from a flood if you don't have flood insurance.
Thank you. Oh, this is a question I just thought of. How do you feel about people building on floodplains?
I'll talk to my mitigation branch chief, and he's not too pleased about it. You know, they've done a lot. I mean, I think a lot of the, like the picture of that slip, right? That landslide. Should that road have been built there? No. But was it built there in 1880s? Probably. You know, so they just cut into the hillside and put their road there, and it's prone to slippage. But I think that I would hope that development in floodplains doesn't go on like it has before. But I mean, it's unfortunate, especially if you don't have flood insurance, but I think that sometimes people's circumstances don't allow them to not be where they are. So I probably look at it more from that perspective. You know, that, I mean, there was a family down in Brown County in 2015, I think, that lived in a trailer right along a creek. And because they didn't have anywhere else they could go, Brown County is a very poor county, rural county. And a flash flood came through and killed the pregnant mother and two of their kids. I'm sure that they did not want to be where they were in that circumstance. And they had a horrible tragedy happen to them. So I think what I would say to that is that we need to find a way to help people get insurance or to help them get out of harm's way, which is really what our mitigation branch does on a day-to-day basis to try to get those people out of harm's way.
Thank you. So has dealing with these kind of situations changed how you and your family prepare for things?
We do not have tons of gallons of water down in the basement. I can tell you that. But yes, I mean, having done it for so long, I'd hate to say, I'll just be honest. I've never really had anything tragic or significant like anything that I've shown you today or that you've seen on TV happen to me personally. And so you kind of get into that mindset of, well, it's never going to happen to me, right? And there was even some of that throughout the book. You know, that people, they're just like, meh, it was a tremor. I live in LA. It's not that big of a deal. But we do have plans to plan.
Would you ever move to some place that had a volcano or had, knowing what you know?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'd ever want to move to the West Coast. So like, I could see me moving to the beach because I love the ocean, but there's a risk there with hurricanes, right? But I don't know that I would ever move to somewhere that was volcano or earthquake prone. I mean, that's just, I mean, you've got no advance warning or very little advance warning that something like that's going to happen, right? At least with a hurricane, you know it's coming, and you can leave. Your house might get destroyed, but you can still evacuate. But I don't think I would ever move somewhere that was prone to earthquakes or volcanoes.
Yeah, I noted that with the dry Ike and the derecha, for any of you who came to the library at that time, so many places around Westerville were out of power that we had people sitting on the floor, grouped around power outlets, and
Right.
people just dealt with it. It was heartwarming, actually, that
Yeah.
people could get along and do that.
Right. Sure.
Now, a lot of this book was done from different people's perspective. That, the historian found accounts of this later on. So, does your department ever hear back from those that you helped or survivors to see what happened to them after time has gone by?
Oh, well, I work on a regular basis with the local government. So you might think that it's not the same as a disaster survivor, but it is, because, when you have a road that's been closed for 4 years, it's impacting the people that travel that road, right? So I hear more back from those individuals, but they did have, after the Memorial Day tornadoes, the Miami Valley had a very robust long-term recovery committee, an individual recovery committee and a community recovery committee. And their individual recovery committee did tremendous work and did it so quickly to where people like people from Paradise, California, who had those horrible wildfires in 2018, I think, were calling them, asking them for advice on how they could structure their individual recovery work. The Monroe County in Florida, which is where Key West is, we're calling them, asking them for advice. And when they had an individual recovery celebration, when they wrapped things up earlier I guess it was late summer, and it was absolutely beautiful to have the mayor of Dayton and the local officials, and they had disaster survivors that came to the celebration, people who had been helped by this group. So I've only really experienced it in that way, other than just the work that I do on a regular basis to help, the local governments with their recovery.
Do you guys have a historian?
We don't. I've got boxes and boxes of old newspaper clippings and stuff from the Shadyside flood and from the 97 flood. And I know we are working with the state archives to get some of that information archived so that, more people can have access to it, but we don't have a historian proper on our staff.
I'd like to suggest that you get an intern for a summer.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Up.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, especially if you point to books like this, those
Right.
books can only be written because somebody wrote something down.
Right.
So.
Right. Yep.
Kent and Lori ask, if there is a tornado, where should you go in your home? Like, where exactly do you go?
You go to the most secure place that you have. So I have a basement, so we go in the basement, but we would also go under the steps in the basement because that's where you're most protected. My mom lives in a house over in Lincoln Village, not far from me. She doesn't have a basement. She has a hall closet. So that's where she would go. So you just have to go to the most secured space that you have. And it's not always foolproof. I don't remember which tornado it was, but there was a woman who laid on top of her children as the house collapsed in on them, and they were in the basement and broke both of her legs, but they all survived. So the safe room, if you can get a safe room, is your best bet. I don't know if anyone on this call ever goes to the state fair, but we always have a display of a safe room. If you go to the Ohio Department of Public Safety section in the Celeste building, or I forget which one it is, but where they always have all the state agencies set up, there are displays of safe rooms there, but that would be the safest foolproof spot.
Could you define that a little bit more, what a safe room is? Because like if you have an apartment, do you get a safe room and put it in a corner, or what is it?
Yeah, they have, let me, do you care if I stop sharing my screen and go to something else here?
Please do.
And find one here, hang on a second.
Because I always think of those as, anti-murder rooms and not so much natural disasters. We had a couple of years at the library where at least once a week, everybody go down to the basement. So if you're
Yeah.
ever at the library and there's a tornado, you're going to see where all the books get their stickers.
So it could even be just something like this. So,
Oh wait, your screen is still being, I would unshare and then
Yeah.
click share it.
All right. So can you see this right here?
Yes.
All right. So like, even if you did like a home remodel of a bathroom in your house, and now, and this isn't an apartment, obviously, but you could always make your bathroom a safe room just by how you rebuild it. They did these. So probably everybody knows about the tornado outbreak in 1974 in Xenia, which also that's where Mr. Shipley's from. They had another tornado in 2000 and it hit their fairgrounds. And when they rebuilt their fairgrounds, they made their bathrooms safe rooms. There are also, so it doesn't have to be anything massive like this. This looks like it's a school safe room. There's also ones where you dig a hole in your yard, like this one here, and then you can go down, like the stuff they used to have, like when you see the old tornado, like Twister at the very beginning of Twister, when they go down into that little room on their property. But they also have community safe rooms where they have a community shelter and they make it into a safe room. There's one at Delaware State Park. There's one out in Licking County. So this is kind of what some of the grant recipients who get the mitigation dollars, this is what they do with some of their dollars. Most of the funding for mitigation that's spent from our agency is for acquisition and demolition of flood-proof home or flood-prone homes. But we have, I think they are funding more and more these community safe rooms. And like I said, that safe room rebate program which is our places that you could go. So if you're in an apartment, if you're not, I mean, you're just gonna have to go somewhere where there's 4 walls. Not an interesting fact about the Memorial Day tornadoes is that there were several large apartment complexes that were directly hit by the tornadoes. And there was no loss of life, which I don't even know how, considering how large of a tornado it was. But you just need to go to wherever you've got 4 solid walls around you that are not exterior walls.
Okay, thank you. And let's see. So we did ask, does the EMA ever consult or go to other states? So it sounds like people are calling you guys.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone? I mean, I know you talked about the department, but have you ever gone out of state or even to another country to help?
Never to another country. I went to Florida after Hurricane Irma and helped them with their, so before you can get, and this isn't going to be true with my certain circumstance, but before you get a disaster declaration from FEMA or from the president rather, you have to do what's called a preliminary damage assessment, where FEMA and the state go to the disaster area and assess the damage together. So I went and did that in Florida for about a week. And then I've also been to South Carolina and helped with the kickoff of administering the grant program that we do here in Ohio, because it's the same across the board. Every state can get a public assistance, which is local government or individual assistance disaster survivors declaration. So those are the couple of times that I've been to other states.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. And now we're going to open it up to everybody. I would love to know what you think about this book. I am in book love with Simon Winchester. I will read absolutely anything that he writes. So feel free to unmute yourself and share what you did or did not like about the book. If you don't want to unmute, you could also write it in the chat and I will read it out loud. So I remember the first time I read this, I was in a geology class in college and was just eating it up. And I was also a history major, so this was right on the sweet spot of personal accounts, primary documentation. And this is one of those world events where even if somebody doesn't know exactly what it is, I think most people have at least heard of Krakatoa and the loudest sound ever heard. I found it fascinating. Laura, did your husband read it?
No, he did not. He did when I started, but he hasn't. But I was talking about it with my coworkers this week, and somebody on my team had read it. He said he really, really, really enjoyed it. So,
right. Did you feel any kind of kinship with this, like being in contact with so many people who go through something like this, where just like their world ends essentially?
Right. And I did, I think, and I noted one, well, that was the part that I noted about, I mean, can you even imagine losing all of your things? Can you even imagine seeing a wall of water coming at you at 60 miles an hour? I cannot. But, whether it's, large and gets the news as attention, or whether it's something smaller and doesn't, it's the person who's gone through that disaster. It's just as tragic to them, whether it's flooding, water in their basement, or their home's completely gone because of a tornado. But I find, in some instances I've seen where an event, the community never recovered. Like some of the towns down along the Ohio River have never recovered from the Ohio River flood in '97. Just totally decimated their community. Not all of them, but some of them. But then when you try to think about how are you going to recover from, I told you I like disaster movies, so I know this is a book club, but the movie 2012, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but I don't know how you would ever recover from that. Like, I guess they just built a new place for people to live, and that's how they did it. But when you look at disasters that have happened, there was a tornado that happened in Kansas that completely destroyed their town, and they rebuilt it, and they rebuilt it green, ironically enough. So it's possible, it can be done. It's just, it seems very overwhelming though. This would be very overwhelming.
Yeah. I have a bit of family history with the Xenia tornado. My mother was in high school, and she was they were trying to raise money for something for school. And so they took them out to sell something like encyclopedias in Urbana. So they got in the car, all the kids dispersed, and were knocking on doors. And she said from 1 minute to the next, it turned as black as night, like somebody just turned the sun off, and everything got eerily quiet. So she's going around knocking on doors, and the sirens go off, and somebody opens their basement door and goes, "What are you doing? Get in here." So some stranger let her ride out, the Xenia tornado a town over. But
Wow.
one of the other students had to lay in a ditch and tried to pull debris over him, and it all got yanked off of him. He was in the ditch, but could you imagine everybody just coming back to the car after that to go back to Columbus?
Right now. Wow.
But yeah, if anybody has any kind of story, or maybe even just family history that you would like to share, that's something like this. This is a good forum for that.
I lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan when the tornadoes went through up there. That was back in the 80s, in the early 80s. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but I know it was devastating. It was just unbelievable to walk or not even walk, you couldn't get downtown to get near and just see the devastation. And I know some people that happened to be downtown when it happened, and they said it was like the tornado sat on top of a building for a while and then all of a sudden just took off. And my brother worked at a car dealership that was outside of the city a little ways, and he said that they could see it coming, and mostly they could see the tail whipping back and forth. And he said it was frightening, but he said it was also mesmerizing, that they almost couldn't stop watching it before they finally went inside and sought shelter. I can't imagine.
Thank you for sharing that. That's the thing about being inland. I think the coastal areas probably have a few more stories, like especially collective stories of stuff that go down. Would anyone else like to share or talk about something from the book? Anything?
I was a teacher in Kettering, Ohio, which is a suburb of Dayton, when the senior tornado hit, and it was really, really scary. But my husband was worked for a newspaper, and he was one of the first ones to go into Xenia after it hit. And he said the same thing. He just couldn't even imagine what it looked like and everything. And then I've taken bike rides through Yellow Springs and that area, and Xenia, they do have different memorials and things like that to commemorate the tornado. And I believe that the reason that we have the sirens go off every Wednesday at noon, I think it goes back to the Xenia tornado.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's the reason why, because of that. So
Thank you. Laura, I did want to ask a question. If somebody is interested in volunteering, like they hear that something happens and they would like to help in any way, is there any way for a regular citizen to help with these kind of disasters?
Sure. So I think what would like, because they don't want people to just show up, because then there's health and safety risk there, obviously. So if there was something that happened, you would likely see messaging through Facebook or Twitter or on the news, wherever, that would say, hey, we were going to have a volunteer cleanup day in this area that got hit by this tornado. And then yes, you could, the volunteers could certainly go and help clean up. Like I remember, and this was more spontaneous than not, but I remember when I was up there after the tornadoes in Wood County, a bunch of the high school students were out picking up debris from farmers' fields, while I was there. But, when you're in the middle of responding and you're a small county EMA, you have a whole lot going on, and you don't want all those people just spontaneously showing up. Just like it's better to send money than all your old clothes, because then it just sits there in a pile. And then, that's a big challenge too. Not that it's not nice for people to do that, but again, that donations management can be something that kind of veers folks away from really what they need to be focusing on, just because people are so kind in wanting to share their time or their things with people who've been hit by disasters. But
I have a ham radio license, and
sweet.
yeah, and I know there are different ways for hams to sign up.
Yeah,
to help across the world, actually, to help with disasters. So if anybody is interested, you could become a ham radio operator and help with local and federal disasters. Okay. Would anyone else like to talk about the book? Does anybody have a suggestion? I love this one. So if you read this and you liked it, do you have a suggestion as to something else somebody could read? It doesn't have to be the same topic either. You can put it in the chat. So this is awful, but one of the most popular sections in the library is the true crime section. So even if it wasn't historical events where, you know, something went down, like the 1904 San Francisco earthquake, there are a bunch of books on those, some very good ones. But Eric Larson is a narrative nonfiction author who I think reads a lot like Simon Winchester, but he talks about criminals or bad things that happen in history due to a single individual. So he has quite a few of them. My favorite of that one is called Devil in the White City. So during the World Fair in Chicago, there was a guy who essentially set up a house specifically to kill people. And this dude, you would not believe how long he got away with it. But just like this, in that story, he'll go from what's happening in that situation to what's happening in Chicago, what's happening around the world, and then back to the horror. So I recommend, if you like this, I would read Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more comments. Okay, guys, last chance. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, Lisa says Devil in the White City is a fabulous book. I have an entire list, folks, if you liked this. Okay, well, Laura, this was fascinating, and I've always wanted to know this stuff, so thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to engage with us and teach us about what it is that you do, the really important thing that you do for everybody in the state, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So what do you think of your first book club?
I like it.
Yeah. Usually there's a lot more talk about the individual book. So
Right.
I gotta tell
That's
you.
all right.
Yeah. But that's why I like this one. It's like, yeah, but what happens in real life?
Right.
So
Right.
again, thank you. All right,
Yeah,
everybody,
sure.
again, the next book in March is, somebody already wrote it. I forgot it already. It's the Jodi Picoult book that talks about death doulas, and we will have a local death doula tell us about how that job works. So stay tuned to the event schedule. Those books will become available in February. Another message. The Book of Two Ways. Thank you. I don't know why I can't keep that in my head. The Book of Two Ways by Jodi Picoult. All right, but in the meantime, come into the library, say, I really like this book. What else can I read? And I promise we can help you. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Laura, again, thank you. And everybody have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.